We've been hearing arguments all week about statues of Confederate generals in Charlottesville and all over the country, including Dallas. Their very presence in public places continues to cause division and pain among us. Some say these men were all bad because they fought to preserve the institution of slavery. And make no mistake, that was the cause. Others want to whitewash the fact that they fought against the United States and for the right to own other human beings. They only want to emphasize what otherwise honorable men they were. Do you see what we do with our figures of the past? It's impossible to assess them perfectly. And so we all have an interest in one version of their lives or another. Some, including our president, think that if Robert E. Lee is censured, then what about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and even Abraham Lincoln? The former two were slaveholders themselves, and Lincoln started out with many of the same attitudes about the inferiority of blacks and the superiority of whites and the institution of slavery that Southerners held. Here's the thing. The Founding Fathers laid the groundwork for the future liberation of all, even if they didn't live up to it entirely themselves in their day. We see in Lincoln, though especially, a change of heart that is Joseph-like in his progress. We see his mind change to the point where he has a disgust for slavery, and he uses his power for the emancipation of slaves. We do not see that in those who fought to preserve white supremacy and a system of systemic racism. These statues need to come down not to deny history, but to acknowledge that the reason they were put there in the first place was not a fair rendering of history itself. If that were the case, we would also have statues of former slaves and of abolitionists side by side. But where are the Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman statues, right? These statues were erected either during times in the last century that coincided first with the birth of the KKK or during the Civil Rights era, when white Americans were anxious about what would become of them if black Americans received the full measure of their citizenship. They were deliberate reminders to black Americans about who is still in charge. That is not what we want to say to one another today. We need to think more about who we want to be than who we were. And these men are not our models. They keep the wound of racial injustice open, and they hurt white Americans as well as people of color.